Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Leading Life Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Zook, and here is where we talk about leadership, personal development, and living our very best lives. Here we go. On today's episode, right now, perspective at 30,000 feet. Yeah, have you ever been stuck in your own head over things going on in your life? Meaning you're having trouble getting past something bothering you, or maybe you've gone through a recent disappointment and it just eats at you. I think we've all been there. And that's what I really want to talk about today is how do we categorize those things in our minds so we don't put so much importance on them. And earlier this year, I had flown from Orlando to Baltimore to be in my nephew's wedding. Some of my family lives in Indiana, and then my sister still lives in Maryland, close to Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And so I got to spend some time with her husband, and my nieces and nephew. And I flew into Baltimore because it's a little bit less expensive than sometimes flying into D.C. But I had a really great time with everybody. The wedding was beautiful. It was in the summer, right in the capital. And it was great connecting with family and seeing all these people celebrate my nephew's nuptials. So it was really nice. And I took some of this time also for some personal soul searching. I'd been really struggling with something that I could just not work out in my mind. And it was just one of those things where you go through a disappointment and it leaves you baffled as to why it happened at all. Like you can't even believe it. And you start to really question the humanity of people around you. And we all go through these things, like I said, but sometimes I wonder, God, am I too sensitive, or do I need to change who I am in dealing with these things? And quite honestly, you know what? The answer is no. You don't need to change and I don't need to change. We need to actually further embrace exactly who we are. The day after the wedding, I got to the airport to fly home and I made really good time. I got into my terminal and there's a little restaurant that I like to eat at. So I had enough time to order a burger and an iced tea. As I settled up to the bar, I saw a young woman across the restaurant talking with the waitstaff openly about the things she had done on her vacation, and she had like the best vacation. And I couldn't really hear the conversation, but it looked like she was having a great time, and she was working on her second glass of champagne. And I'm sitting there watching her like thinking, that's pretty baller. She's throwing down on some champagne. It was like, not like they just poured a glass, but they like brought her the little bottle, and she's obviously living her best life, and I'm excited for her. So it gave me a smile. And as I finished up my hamburger and iced tea, I made my way to the gate. And without fail, every time with this certain flight, it was delayed. So you know what? I said, I got another hour. I went back to the little restaurant, had another glass of iced tea, and the same young lady was still there, having a great time, telling about all her adventures. And I was like, wow, that's really good for her. Like, I'm really excited for her. And the next thing you know, I get a notice on my phone that the plane was ready and to get to the gate. So I got on the plane, sat in my seat, which was on the aisle, and then there was a woman that had the window seat, and the space in between us was open. So just as about they were getting ready to close the door to the plane, we saw someone coming down the aisle. Because before that, we're sitting there like, oh, I guess we'll have more room. And then I felt a finger tapping my leg. And I looked up, and it was the girl from the restaurant that was drinking the champagne. And she was crying. She got into her seat, and she just started crying uncontrollably. And I was sitting there like, I don't even know what to do right now. I just feel horrible because something really bad must have just happened. 15 minutes before she was drinking champagne in the restaurant. Now she's broken. So I softly said, hey, listen, whatever's going on, take it easy. It's going to be okay. And in between her sobs, she said, it's not going to be okay. My father just was killed in a motorcycle accident. And it's kind of weird because like everybody around us could hear her crying, but barely anybody would make eye contact. Most people were kind of like looking annoyed and shook their head. Like, what's this lady carrying on for? They had no idea. So I glanced over at the woman in the window seat and she looked at me back and we kind of made eyes like, what do we do now? But after a few minutes, one of the flight attendants had come over and asked her if she was okay to fly because we were about to take off. Could they get her anything? And she said, no, I just got the bad news about my father and I needed to get home. And so once we took off and once we reached the right altitude, the flight attendant came back over, brought her a water and some tissues. And the girl in the window seat was really the hero of this story because she began to console her and hold her hair back while she wept. And the only thing that I could do was say, hey, we're here for you. Let us know what we can do to help. And so for the next 2 hours from Baltimore to Orlando, we didn't move. We just sat with her and we consoled her the best we could. I can't even imagine what would be going through my own mind if I had just found out my father had passed away. Another passenger brought over some aspirin for her to take, and then she was able to start telling us some more information. Her aunt was going to meet her at the airport because she was going to be in no condition to drive. And as we landed, the flight attendant had made an announcement that we would let her off first, that we had an emergency, so everybody remained seated, and that we that sat with her would be let off right after her. And also there would be an agent to meet her at the terminal to help her. So I was saying about people kind of being bothered by the situation as we took off. Well, that started to change because I started to see the humanity in everybody on the plane come together. And like I said, a passenger brought her some aspirin. Someone else brought her another water. Even a priest who was on board had come over to speak with her and pray with her. And then something really special happened. A lady, a couple seats ahead of me, turned around and she said, "Can you give this to her? Because her daughter had knitted a little plush for her to have. And so will you give it to her?" Yeah, so this lady's 13-year-old daughter had sat there the whole time, the whole 2 hours, and knitted this plush for her, the shape of a pumpkin or something. And so I was so inspired by that. As we got off the plane, I spotted the lady that sat in the window seat, and I went up to her and I hugged her and I said, "You were the hero of this flight, and you were the hero for this woman today." Like I said, it's remarkable because this woman had gone from sipping champagne, laughing and smiling, to then utter devastation over losing her father. So I got home later that day. My wife met me at the door, and I don't think I ever hugged her tighter. I told her the story, and we just both sat there and looked at each other like, wow. The following day, I woke up early, like I do every day. I had my coffee, I worked out at the gym, and then I sat down to have another cup with my wife before I went to work. And she said, "How are you feeling about everything you were going through before you left? You know, you had some conflicts and you had some sad feelings." And I said, "You know what? I spent time with my family. I saw my nephew getting married. I even danced to the Bee Gees with my sister, as horrifying as that sounds. And you know what? I'm good. Matter of fact, I don't even care anymore. I'm good because I have it so good. I can't imagine the pain that this young woman was going through. I've never really had to face anything like that in my life. I'm 56 years old and haven't had to face a death in the family. So all my problems dissipated quickly. And just like that, it all faded. I was wrapped up in my own head about something that wasn't even that big of a deal. And so this episode is about how we resolve to prioritize better how much importance we give trivial things in our lives. And I'm not saying that something that hurts you or I is trivial, but I think we need to measure it really against the scale of bigger things that people deal with. And here's why I'm telling you this story and why you're listening to this podcast episode. It is because sometimes we need to zoom out, even if it's at 30,000 feet. So a couple things that I think will help. Number one, we need to ask the bigger frame questions to bring us clarity. Will this matter a week from now, a year from now? What does this really impact? These are questions that shrink small problems and spotlight the ones that truly matter. Number two, we shift from ourself to others. If you notice in the story, all my problems went away once I sat with this woman on the plane. When you step outside your own frustration, ask yourself, how does this affect my people, my family, myself? You then widen the lens, and empathy helps you see beyond your own personal disappointments. Number three, use compassion without diminishing. So it's not about saying, my problem doesn't matter. It's about recognizing others face bigger struggles and I still have so much to be grateful for. This will help reframe your problem without denying your personal feelings. Like this woman was going through on the plane far exceeded the trivial troubles of my mind, or in my mind, I should say. Number 4, step physically back. Yeah, sometimes your environment locks you into small thinking. Go for a walk, sit outside, journal in a new place. Physical distance helps you gain mental distance. Number 5, focus on what you can control. When zoomed in, everything feels urgent and overwhelming. When zoomed out, you see, only 1 or 2 things are actually mine to influence that's happening right now. And number 6, we're going to talk more about this on the next episode, but ask, does this problem really go against what matters most to me? So remembering your core values. If not, it might not deserve as much weight. Values are like a zoom lens. They help you refocus on what's meaningful. So this encounter really helped me reframe my personal disappointment. My recent struggle was just nothing compared to what she was going through. And sometimes our hurt feels huge until we see it in perspective. And so here's my takeaway for you. I want you to ask yourself, am I giving too much weight to something small compared to what truly matters? And I think you've heard me say this on the podcast before, but one thing I say to myself when I get overwhelmed is there is somebody doing way more than I am with much less than I have. There would be so many people willing to, trade their lives with mine in a heartbeat all over the world. But there's somebody out there doing way more than I am with much less than I have. So whenever I do have a problem, it's incredibly small when I know I could do so much more. And so here is your leadership edge for this episode. Leaders who can put challenges in perspective lead with more grace and empathy. People are looking for you to be the calm in the storm. They're looking for you to be collected and put together. So in our brain, this all starts in our prefrontal cortex. This is the thinking and executive control of the brain. So when we step back to put things in perspective, that prefrontal cortex helps us regulate emotions, weigh long-term consequences, and reframe problems. The amygdala fires strongly when we feel threatened or overwhelmed. So gaining perspective reduces amygdala reactivity, calming the sense of danger or urgency because the brain recognizes that is the issue. And then the anterior cingulate cortex plays a role in conflict monitoring and helping regulation. So when perspective is applied, the ACC helps us detect that emotional conflict, which is big feelings versus rational reframing, and adjust us toward a more balanced response. And then lastly, I want you to remember gratitude. Like I spoke of my life, cherish what you have. I want you to remember from this episode, the thing that I want you to remember from this episode is to slow down and zoom out on the problem you're having and weigh it more carefully. And so I have a LinkedIn post going out this morning to go along with this episode, and I want to invite you to think about some things that maybe you blew out of proportion in the past and learn to shift your perspective on. I would love if you share that in the post. All right, so that's my episode, Perspective at 30,000 Feet. I hope that inspired some thoughts about what we put our focus on and putting things more in perspective. If you like what you're hearing, please leave me a rating and review. Share this episode with friends, coworkers, and family members. I'm going to leave you the way that I always do, and that is to lead on, lead strong, lead boldly, most importantly, be awesome you. I will never forget that young woman on the plane that sat next to me, and I hope that she's healing and dealing with things better because I can't imagine how hard that was. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you on the next episode. Bye.